Welcome, everyone, to another session of the Wealth Academy series that we've got going on with Rand Swiss. I'm just going to give it a couple minutes just to let everyone jump in. I see there's still more participants, but yeah, guys, thank you so much for coming on to another one of these series. As I've always mentioned, the purpose of these series is just to help educate the client base on the different product suites available to investors. I remember when I joined, it's incredibly difficult to try to work back and forth with regards to understanding the different products. And the purpose of this is just to unpack every product in great detail. So from a client perspective, you at least know what you're getting into, and you know all the tax benefits, the estate planning benefits behind these different products. Now, 2 weeks ago, we did do a episode dedicated to retirement funds. And the purpose is that we feel retirement funds, there's going to be a massive change happening on the 1st of September. Now, to understand that change, we first had to understand how the current retirement fund landscape is. Now, in that discussion, we said we'd be lucky enough to be joined by one of the industry leaders who will be unpacking the two-pot system, and that's what we have today. Now, we've often had a bit of questions in preparation to this change happening on the 1st of September from clients. And I mean, questions have ranged from all sorts. One of the questions is, will I have 30,000 Rand in my bank accounts on the 1st of September? Another question is, should I withdraw all my funds out my preservation fund before this change? The purpose of today's webinar is to, put some genuine lights on this topic, provide very useful information. Our whole philosophy at Rand Swiss is always go to the direct source of, either the asset that derives value or the direct source for information. And I feel the gentleman who's, we're lucky enough to have join us today is the perfect at doing this. Ladies and gentlemen, Jaco Tonder is the Head of Advisor Services at 91 and also the Deputy Chair of the CISA Marketing and Distribution Board Committee. So we really do have someone that has excessive knowledge on this topic. He's been very involved in the creation of this two-part system, and I think we will also leave Jaco's details at the end of this webinar. If you're unhappy about anything, feel free to give him a very unhappy phone call in which you can then discuss anything. But ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to take any time away from Jaco. He's got obviously lots to talk on this very, interesting topic. So yeah, Jaco, please take us away.
Thanks very much, and good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be on the call with you tonight, or this afternoon, quite frankly, actually. And it's the session today is really the objective of the session is to take you through the basics and to make you understand the practical implications of the so-called two-pot regulation changes to our pension fund system in South Africa. And it's a change that is scheduled to happen in little over, what is the date today, 15th, so a little over 2 weeks' time on the 1st of September, which is a Sunday. So it will be the 2nd of September, which is a Monday. These changes will be in effect as of that date. And these changes have got a significant impact on people who are currently invested in retirement funds. And so the idea today is to take you through the basics of what those impacts are, and to understand that in future, certain things will happen a little differently than in the past, and what are those things that will be happening a bit differently. And then at the end, I think we're going to have a bit of a discussion with amongst ourselves, or with questions around what the further financial planning implications are. So kind of let's get straight into the actual detail. If I can get the slide around, there we go. So if we start with the two-component system, the first question I often get from people is, why are we even bothering with this change? Why are we making this massive change to the system? Wasn't the system already good enough as it was before? And the answer to that is really the pension fund system in South Africa has been undergoing steady reform under the guiding hand of Treasury for almost 20 years now. And there's been consistent changes, all coming from the right place to improve our system, to make it more robust, and to make it more in line with what the World Bank and the OECD countries prescribe as being the standard for pension fund systems. And so there had been two long-standing weaknesses in our pension fund system in South Africa that has not been addressed, and that's been on the radar for a long time. And really, COVID gave us the political will to finally take on these challenges head on and come up with a solution. And those two long-standing problems with us, a retirement fund system, has been the fact that we are a little schizophrenic in terms of how we allow people access to their retirement fund before they retire. So when they retire, people buy the income product and they go on pension, and we're quite happy that that part of the system works really well. The part of the system that doesn't work so well in many cases is the part when you are still saving for retirement while you're working. And there are two deficiencies in our current system. Firstly, if you're working and for some reason you develop a substantial financial problem, and COVID was a classic example. Many people didn't lose their jobs. They just stopped earning a salary, or their sales commission, if they were in a commission job, collapsed to zero because no one could go to the office. And so people still had a job, but they had no income. And they were unable to access their pension fund to buy food for their family. So they could have 3 million rand in their pension fund, but their family would be going hungry, and they would have to borrow money from friends and family, because they couldn't get any access because they hadn't lost their job. They were technically still employed. On the other hand, in our current system, if you lose your job, whether it is because you resign or because you are retrenched, doesn't actually matter. If you change your employment, you have the opportunity to cash your entire savings pot for retirement in, pay tax, and use that money to buy a new car or upgrade your kitchen. Now, that's also irresponsible, because often what we find today is that people don't need to take money from their pension fund when they change jobs, because they're moving seamlessly from one job to the next. They finish at the end of August with company A, and they start the 1st of September with company B. There's no interruption in their earning capacity. But yet even those people we see on actual industry data all cash in their retirement fund savings, particularly when they in their 20s and early 30s, and they spend that money frivolously. So our system is schizophrenic. We give no access when people have a definite need, and then we give people 100% access when they actually don't need the money. And so Two-Pot's combined objective is to try and solve both of these problems in our retirement fund system. So that's what we're trying to do with the Two-Pot system. So let's look at the system in some level of detail, and I'm hoping you can see my mouse here. The Two-Pot system means that every one of your retirement fund statements, and I'm presuming most of you have got some retirement fund at the moment. It will be a fund with an employer where you're working, or if you're self-employed, it will be a retirement annuity. And all of you currently have a retirement fund. Now, what happens in future is that retirement fund, if you draw a statement, it will look a little bit more complicated than it looked before. And why would it look more complicated? Because all of a sudden, your retirement fund is now going to consist of 3 separate balances: a so-called vested component balance, a retirement component balance, and a savings component balance. And each of these 3 balances give you different benefits and different rights. And it's important to understand what those differences are going to be. So the vested component on the right-hand side is really going to be all your current assets that you've got in a pension fund, anywhere. So if you've got an existing pension fund with your employer, you have a retirement annuity, you've got a preservation fund because you've changed jobs before and you chose to preserve the money, it actually doesn't matter what type of retirement fund you've got. On 31 August, whatever is in that retirement fund for your benefit will be locked down in the balance that we call the vested component. And the reason we lock it down is because Treasury wants to make sure that you don't lose the access and tax rights that you've got on those assets. So these assets that you've got today will forever be protected, and the rules that govern them will not change. The Two-Pot changes will only apply to your new contributions after 1 September. So your current assets are protected, so there's no need for people who are employed to now resign their jobs, cash in their old retirement fund assets and park it away somewhere to protect it from two-pot. Two-pot does not affect your current assets. Your existing assets and the rights are fully preserved, and that's a very important point. The retirement component and the savings component are two new blocks that are introduced, and in future your contributions from your pension fund will be split 2/3, 1/3. So all contributions you make from 1 September to your RA or to your company provident or pension fund will be split 1/3, 2/3 into these two components. And these two components have played two very different roles. The retirement component in the middle, the way that I describe it to people is that it's a little bit like a cosmic black hole. Money can go into this pot, but lump sum monies can never come out of this pot. So this green pot's job is to make sure that you have money to buy you an income or a pension the day that you actually retire. That is the job of the retirement components. The retirement component's sole job is to protect you against yourself so that you don't withdraw all of your retirement assets before you reach age 55 or 60 or 65 or 70 or whenever you want to retire and spend that money frivolously. So it's a protection against yourself. That's what the retirement component's job is. And the savings component job is to make sure that you have some limited access to some funds from your retirement pool if you experience financial difficulty at some point during your working lifetime, whether that is a second round of COVID, whether that is you losing your job and looking for a job for 3 or 4 or 5 months, and you needing some money to tide you over from a household expense perspective. That money will in future be drawn or will be available from your savings component. So that's what each of these components' jobs are. So this one is to protect your current assets. This one is to make sure that you've got money to retire from when you reach age 55 or 65. And the savings component is to make sure that you've got some access to emergency funding if you develop a financial need during your working lifetime. So now there are some rules that apply, and I think it's important. I think what I think to be the key rules is what I put on the slide. The first slide, and this refers to the 30,000 that Carl mentioned earlier on today, is that some of your vested components, and actually some is 10% capped at 30,000 Rand. So if your current pension assets are more than 300,000 Rand, then it will be 30 that will be moved to the savings component. If you have less than 300,000 Rand in your pension fund, it will be 10% of whatever the value is. So if it's 100,000 Rand in your pension fund, you'll only get 10% of that, which is 10,000 Rand, transferred into your savings component on the 1st of September. So everybody's savings component will have an opening balance. When this account is created by your pension fund administrator, there will be an opening balance in that fund, and that value of that opening balance will be the 10% of the vested component, capped at 10%. And that will then be immediately available to be withdrawn. So that's where the often asked question comes from. So my pension fund will be 30,000 Rand that I can withdraw on 1 September. And the answer to that question is yes, it will only be 30,000 Rand if your fund value is more than 300,000. If it's less than 300,000, then clearly it will be a lower number than 30,000 Rand that is available. But yes, everybody's savings component will start with some balance, somewhere between 0 and 30,000 Rand, depending on how much money you've got in the account already. We discussed the rules that govern the retirement component. It just means that whatever's in here is untouchable until you reach retirement. That's the only thing you need to remember. So if you develop a financial need and you draw on your savings component and you take everything from your savings component so that there's nothing left, then there's no more access. There's no ability to access your retirement component for emergencies. Your emergency funding is limited to your savings component on the left. And the savings component Well, the savings component is the one that all the talk is about. This is what everybody is keen on because this is what they're going to be doing. They're going to be withdrawing their seeded component on the 1st of September, and everybody's hoping that it will be 30,000 Rand. However, I think there are a couple of key caveats that you need to understand. First of all, you might not get 30,000 in your savings component because your fund value is too small. You'll get 10% of your fund value capped at 30,000. So many people will get 10 and 15 and 20,000 as their seeded amount, not 30. The second point to understand is that you will be paying marginal income tax on this withdrawal, which effectively means that the withdrawal from your pension fund, the savings opening balance, will be added to your taxable income for the year. And so for most people who earn a decent salary, they'll be paying 30% or more effective tax on this withdrawal. So your 30,000 is not 30,000 that is in your pocket. It is 30,000 minus somewhere between 20 and 45% of income tax, depending on what your income tax bracket is that you belong to. And so most people will not get the 30, they'll get something closer to 20. And then, of course, the other thing that needs to be deducted is that some retirement funds are going to be charging an administration fee to enable you to get your savings component paid out. And that administration fee looks to be anywhere between 100 Rand and 600 Rand, depending on the funds. So that will also be deducted from the savings component withdrawal. So yes, there is, for many people, 30,000 Rand in their savings component on 1 September, but no one is getting 30,000 in their bank account. It will be whatever the balance is, less the tax, less the fees, and that is what you will get paid. The other restriction to keep in mind on your savings component is that you can only make one withdrawal in every tax year. Tax years in South Africa run from 1 March to 28 February. So in every tax year, you can make one withdrawal. If you've made a withdrawal already and you develop a need, your car bursts 2 tires and you need to buy new tires and you don't have funding and you want to make a withdrawal, if you've already made a withdrawal in that tax year, you will not be allowed to do a second withdrawal. Even if you've got money left in your savings component, you will not be allowed to draw it. So that's the key rules around withdrawals while you're working. And obviously, this is the piece that is now new, because it's not only on the 1 September date that you'll be able to draw the money from your savings component and pay income tax. It will now be at any point in time in future. So from 1 September on forwards, whatever balance is in your savings component will be available subject to the tax and the costs and the limitation that you can only draw once per annum. But it will be available anytime. You don't need to prove that you have an emergency. You don't need to convince a trustee from the retirement fund that you've got a legitimate financial need. You can draw the money and spend it on whatever you want to, but you'll pay a hefty tax penalty and you'll pay the administration charge. Those are the only key issues to be aware of. And then once you retire, so that we've now discussed what happens while you're working, and you can access your retirement fund, you can access 1/3 of your contributions. What happens at retirement when you finally do reach age 55 or age 60, then whatever is in your savings component becomes your lump sum at retirement. And so if you have emptied your savings component during your working life because you've regularly drawn on it, you will have no lump sum at retirement to pay off debt, settle outstanding loans on your car or your house. You will basically just get your retirement component, and that will be used to buy you a pension income. There will be no lump sum or big payment from your fund to help you set yourself up for retirement because you've used up that lump sum by withdrawing it during your working lifetime. So you can already see that the downside risks of dipping into your savings account regularly are very high. You pay a big tax penalty, you pay administration charges, and you sacrifice part of your lump sum at retirement and what we call your 550 tax-free lump sum, which is a freebie that SARS gives you. You start sacrificing that as well when you eat into the savings component during your working life. So it is really, really intended for proper emergencies, not for frivolous spending like December holidays or remaking your kitchen or your bathrooms at home. That's really not the idea. The cost and the penalties that you will incur on drawing from your savings component, especially if you are a higher tax bracket taxpayer, starts becoming quite significant. All right, so that is the key essence of the new two-pot system that I believe you need to understand as a member, and kind of the key rules that are going to play a role, and that's going to govern whether you've got money to draw or not from the system. So let's see how this system works in practice. And so what I've done is I've selected 2 case study examples which I've constructed for and we're looking at the first client being someone who's young, they've finished their varsity, and they're starting their first job on 1 September when two-pot starts. So they've got no legacy assets in any retirement fund anywhere. They will only have two-pot assets, and they're contributing 10,000 rands a month to their company pension fund where they started their employment career. So let's have a look at this client's pension fund statement 12 months after they've joined the company. So they've worked at the company for a year. They've paid 10,000 times 12. That's 120,000 in contributions. The contributions have been split 3,333 going to the savings account every month, and 2/3 of 10,000 has gone into the retirement component. And so after a year, I'm just ignoring market growth here to make it the numbers a bit simpler and a little bit more round. They've paid 40,000 rand into their savings component and 80,000 rand into their retirement component. And so let's say that they now, after a year, decide to resign from their job and move to another employer. Well, this is now where things change a lot, because in today's environment, if this client was working at a firm today and they resigned, they would be able to cash in their whole benefit, the full 120,000 that was contributed plus all the market growth on it. They'll be able to take all of that as cash minus the tax that SARS will take, which we call the withdrawal tables tax. So they'll get maybe 80,000 of the 120,000 in their pocket, and typically they will go to today with that 80,000 and they will buy a new car. That's the reality of what happens to 20-year-olds and early 30-year-olds in today's market. Many of them make that mistake. In the new world, post two-pot, they won't be able to do that. They won't be able to access 80,000 rand that is sitting in the retirement component. They will only be able to access 40,000 rand in the savings component, and then they still have to pay tax, which means they're probably going to get something closer to 25 or 30,000 rand out of their withdrawal, as opposed to the 90 or 80,000 that they would have been able to get in the current pension fund system. So this is the first big important change, is in the new two-pot system. When you change jobs, whether through resignation or whether through retrenchment, you will not get the same ability to cash your pension fund in that you've got today. You will now be limited to cashing in only 1/3, and 2/3 needs to be preserved with the new employer or with a retirement annuity or a preservation fund. But you cannot take the green box, cannot be taken as cash anymore. It is now locked. So this is a very important difference compared to what we have today. So that was the resignation. The withdrawal option, so let's assume that the client didn't make a withdrawal, but they transferred the money to a preservation fund, and then they joined a new employer. The money with that preservation fund is sitting there, and it's an exact same replica of what the fund looked like when they were with a previous employer. So the money plus the pots are transferred from the employer fund to the preservation fund. And if they now want to make a withdrawal, they can access the 40,000 again, subject to the same rules, as long as they're drawing more than 2,000, not more than once per annum, and they pay the tax at marginal income tax rates, and they pay the withdrawal cost of the administrator. So you can see the savings component, irrespective of what happens to the pensioner, whether they're working, whether they change jobs, whether they place the money in a preservation fund because they changed jobs or they were retrenched. It makes no difference. Whatever's in the savings component remains available once a year as long as you draw more than 2,000 Rand, subject to the tax that you're going to be paying. So there's no more linking the access to your retirement fund to a life event. A third of your fund will be available permanently without there having to be a life event like a death or a retrenchment or a resignation. You'll be able to access it any time. So I think that's illustrated quite well here. And then immigration is one that we often get a question about, especially from slightly wealthier and slightly older clients, because immigration often is a consideration for them. So the immigration rule at the moment is that you can only get your money out of your pension fund if you've had 3 years of non-tax residency status consecutively. So you've got to first become a non-tax resident with SARS, which is a whole process that I'm not going to go into in any detail. Suffice to say, it will take you at least a year to get that tax status from SARS, and you'll get a big CGT bill that you've got to pay. But then you're a non-tax resident. And then if you are a non-tax resident for 3 years, at the end of 3 years consecutively, you can apply to withdraw your pension fund money and you'll pay the withdrawals tax, and the money will be paid over to you and you can repatriate the money overseas. That is what happens today. In the new two-pot world, what will happen is your retirement component will still work that same way. So you'll have to wait 3 years before you can get your retirement component, and you'll have to be a non-tax resident for 3 years to be eligible. However, your savings component will be available immediately, and it will be taxed at income tax rates, which means that it's useful to look at post-immigration how your income tax rates with SARS are going to be changing, because obviously if you're not a tax resident in South Africa, you expect your tax rate in South Africa to drop quite significantly. So there would be some benefit in delaying the withdrawal of the savings component until you've tax immigrated, wait for your income tax rate to reduce quite substantially, and then withdraw the savings component at that point in time, paying the much lower income tax rates. So immigration, there is definitely some opportunity to optimize your tax by just carefully timing when you do the savings component withdrawal. So that's immigration, and then we go all the way to retirement. So our investor here is now, it's the year 2055. They've saved for 30 years for their retirement. You can see their savings account now has 2.5 million Rand in. The retirement component has 6 million. We know that the 6 million must be used in full to buy an income pension. They cannot cash any of the 6 million in. They can cash in from the 2.5 million, and they will pay retirement tables tax, which gives you a nice 550,000 Rand tax-free. They can now exercise all of those rights against the savings component. And then whatever they don't draw as a lump sum from the savings component will be added to the retirement component and used to buy a pension income. And that is the story at retirement. So here you can see quite elegantly how the two-pot system gives you the access during your working lifetime, protects your income that you need to buy at retirement, and gives you some flexibility to move money between the two during your working lifetime. All right. So that is the simple client. This was the young investor who has not belonged to a pension fund before the two-pot system started. We're going to now do the situation that is probably more similar and will be more familiar for the people who are on this call today, because this will in all likelihood be how your pension fund system is going to work. And it's going to work this way because you've got existing pension fund assets. So let's look at a client that is younger than 55, contributing to a company pension fund. They've got 5 million that they have as a fund value in the fund today. And you might not be aware of it, but that 5 million, if you belong to a provident fund, will already contain two pots. So many of you on this call today are already in a two-pot based system. You're actually going to go into a four-pot system once the new system kicks in, because you already have two pots. So if we look at this investor, this is what's going to happen on 1 September. So you have 5 million Rand in your pension fund. That 5 million Rand is going to be allocated to the vested component block so that the rights on those assets can be protected. And at the same time, 30,000 Rand is going to be taken from those two vested pots, and it will be allocated to the savings component. So if you add the 30 to the 994 to the 3976, you will get the 5 million. So no money has been lost, but the money has been split amongst 3 different pots. And the retirement component is 0 because you haven't made a contribution yet. And so this is 1 September. Fast forward 12 months, and we now 1 September 2025. Our intrepid investor has now saved for a year under the two-pot system. Here are their old vested pots, their old pension fund assets from before the two-pot dispensation, still protected. I've ignored market growth. So there's no new money in, but there's also been no withdrawal. So the money is still there. All the rights are in place, waiting for the member to retire or withdraw. The savings component has now grown from 30,000 to 70 because it's received 40,000 in contributions. The retirement component has grown from 0 to 80 because it's received 80,000 in monthly contributions. And now our investor decides to resign from their job. What will happen now? Well, they've got a couple of options now. If they're looking for cash, the simplest would be that they can now cash in their vested pots. That's what you can do today. So this is to show you how your vested pot protects your rights on your current pension fund assets. Today, you can cash your old assets in. So in future, you will always also be able to cash it in if you change jobs. Those rights are protected. You can cash your savings component in and pay income tax as well, but you cannot cash in your retirement component. So if the employee resigns from their job here, they can cash in the 5-odd million that sits over here, but they cannot cash in the 80,000 Rand that sits in the retirement component. That has to be preserved, and it has to be preserved either in the current fund or they can transfer it to their new employer, an RA or a preservation fund. But that's the key principle. You can cash in only your old assets and your savings. You can't cash in your new retirement component savings, excuse me. And that is, again, two-pot in action, changing how things work once you change jobs at your employer. Now we have the example where the member transferred the money after they resigned. They moved the money into a preservation fund. Now they're struggling to find a new employment and they need to draw some money to survive. What can they do? They can now do a once-off withdrawal from their vested component because that's what they can do today. So their existing old before two-pot rights are nicely protected. They can also draw from the savings component. If the vested components are not enough, they can get some of this money, but they cannot get the retirement component before they turn age 55. The retirement component remains locked down. So that's the same as with the previous example. And then we've got a death benefit just out of interest. Death benefits in two-pot makes no difference to it. So if you pass away while working and being a member of a retirement fund, your benefit will collapse into one benefit. All the pots will disappear, and effectively the trustees will make the award based on your nomination wishes that you filled out with the retirement fund and based on their analysis of the dependents that you've got. So in the world of passing away or dying, whilst you're a pension fund member, two-pot changes basically nothing. And then you've got your retirement after 30 years. And now this is when you want to talk to an advisor, because this is where the world becomes really complex, because your old vested assets now need to be processed according to the current pension fund rules. and then your two-pot assets need to be processed according to the new two-pot rules. So it will be absolutely mission critical to have a financial advisor chart a course for you through this to work out how much you should cash in from these pots and how much you should use to buy an income, and then how much you should cash in on this one, and then this one must obviously be used to buy an income in full. So how you design your retirement in future, if you've been part of the two-pot world for 10 or 15 or 20 years, will look very complicated, and it will be important that you consider talking to an advisor about the best way to split your lump sums and your income for retirement and what would be the most tax efficient way. But as you can see, it's going to become significantly more complex at retirement than it's been before. So what can you expect? Many of the clients on this call, I believe, are 91 retirement or preservation fund members. Here's a little snippet of what your retirement fund statement is going to look like when you go online. You will see that you still have the portfolio composition here at the bottom, but what you're going to get is a split between all the different components. So you'll see that you now have 4 separate balances, which adding up together makes up the total balance of your retirement fund account. And so this is the complication to look out for, that you don't only look at the one pot, but that you add them all together to get to your total fund value. All right, so that I think is probably as much information about how the two-pot system is going to work and affect you in the shorter term and the longer term as I think we could reasonably do in a webinar. The last piece I want to just focus on briefly is what is the system's readiness? In other words, are we going to go live 1 September? Yes, we are going to go live 1 September because undoing the go live date of 1 September is almost impossible given how many regulations would need to be amended. So we're somewhat on a one-way ticket train to two-pot that cannot be stopped. We're beyond the point of no return, so we will have to be ready. There are still a significant number of hurdles that need to be overcome. The regulations are slowly falling into place, but it's been quite a challenging space with regulations changing as recently as last week, still with new requirements coming out, and we are 2 to 3 weeks before go live. That's always a challenge. Some fund rules have got to go to the FSCA, but that looks to be under control. SARS has got to finalize the tax director process. As I said, every withdrawal from a savings account will be subject to income tax, and that needs to be taken off by the pension fund administrator before they pay the money to you. And the pension fund administrator needs to ask SARS how much income tax needs to be withheld from every single withdrawal. So that means post 1 September, SARS is likely to get in the order of 2.5 to 3 million tax directive requests from pension funds on behalf of members who want to withdraw their savings accounts. That is a significant workload, and there is some concern in some quarters around whether SARS would be ready on day one to manage that workload. If they're not ready, I think we should expect delays in the payments, and it might take a couple of weeks and maybe in some cases months before people are able to access their savings account withdrawal instructions. So I think it's important to emphasize at this point that people should not be expecting that they can send in their withdrawal request in the last week in August, and in the 2nd of September, on that Monday morning, they will get a payment into their bank account. I think if that is your expectation, you are probably going to be disappointed. We will have to see how the workload and the numbers of requests actually come out, and then we'll figure out whether what the timeframes are going to be for various retirement funds to process these withdrawals. And of course, all the retirement fund administrators in South Africa need to up their systems to be compatible with two-pot. This is a significant systems change, and we should expect some of this to go wrong. System changes of this size never happen without bugs and mistakes and errors. So once again, those bugs and mistakes and errors are likely to lead to some delays. And so I think pension fund members would need to please practice a little bit of patience. If you're going to be submitting a withdrawal request, it's highly unlikely you're going to have your money in 1 or 2 or 3 days. And Carl, I think that's about as far as we're going to go with the slide deck. I think that's all I thought would be appropriate for the audience. So I'm happy to take some questions and facilitate the discussion at this point.
No, of course. No, Jaco, thank you so much for that. Highly informative. Yeah, I think the client base will definitely appreciate it. I love the case study examples. I think it is always a great real life way to look at how a client's retirement funds will actually be the implications behind this change. Just touching on a bit of the benefits of this two-part system, I think, personally, my views, I think this will be great for, most South Africans, especially for the fact that, there's always that very scary stat we talk on about only 6% of South Africans can afford to retire comfortably. And I think you spoke about perfectly in the beginning where it's either one or the other. It's either you can't access it in times of emergency, the current retirement fund structure, you can't access in times of emergency, or on the other hand, you resign or you get retrenched and you have full access. And I'd imagine typically there has been quite a big demand for accessing the full portion of their retirement funds upon resignation, whereas now, hopefully, there's going to be the access of the savings parts, but still having the retirement parts, which the purpose will be to provide income for retirement. So, do you think hopefully we should see that statistic improve over time? So moving from the 6%, do you think hopefully with this two-part change that will increase over time?
That's definitely the objective. When we do the modeling, let's talk about the stats, okay? So if you ask any of the large pension fund administrators like Alexander Forbes or Old Mutual or Sanlam or Momentum or Liberty, what proportion of people who are pension fund members in their funds who are working, when they change their jobs, what proportion of them preserve their pension funds if you're looking at the age group younger than 30? And they will tell you that 99 point something % of people in that age group cash in their entire benefit. That is the reality today. Virtually no one under the age of 30 preserves the pension fund that they've built up in their 20s with their first job, with their first company. No one preserves it. That's the unfortunate position that we have reached in South Africa.
I imagine the compound interest that you're losing out on when it comes to it.
When you can do the sums for clients, or they can do it themselves. But the reality is, if you save for retirement for 40 years, the first 10 years of that 40 years, the money that you save then, in the first decade of your 40-year retirement journey, that represents, at the end of 40 years, 50% of your pension benefit. So if you are not saving that money in the first decade, you are effectively halving your pension fund benefit at retirement. People don't understand, or they underappreciate the massive, massive power of compound interest when it works for you, but also, unfortunately, when it works against you.
Yeah. No, of course. And that's from a more investor standpoint. So I imagine now with the savings part, there is going to be quite a large, you mentioned there's almost an estimate of between 2 to 3 million withdrawal applications that will be coming in from 1 September. That's enormous. I'd imagine obviously the benefit you could say, from a retirement aspect, that's obviously not ideal, but from a more economic aspect, how do you think the South African economy will react to such an influx? Because I imagine they're going to take out from a savings part that's going to be spent, whether that's spent on more emergency goods as, fixing tires or, or more leisure goods like fixing a kitchen, I'd imagine it would still have a better impact for the economy.
Yeah, so, there are wide-ranging estimates. Make no mistake that what we see here is one of life's classic real-life experiments in human behavioral finance, which we cannot predict. All that we know is that when you make money available to people and you put it on the one side of the room and you put the people on the other side of the room, then inevitably the people run for the money. That is how the human psyche has been constructed for decades, or a millennia rather. So we're expecting a significant uptake of this. Estimates for how much money this is, and once we all get lost when we speak of gazillions and billions and trillions and all of those ugly numbers. But the reality is that somewhere between 40 and 100 billion ZAR or rands is going to be withdrawn from the pension fund industry in South Africa. We estimate it to be somewhere between 2 and 3% of the entire industry that will be withdrawn. It's not big enough to cause an upset JSE. So the stock market and the liquidity and the trading on the JSE is more than adequate to deal with that liquidity event from pension funds. And you're quite right that that money, the estimates are that about half of that money will be used. Obviously, SARS is going to take its cut. So the tax man is smiling at Two-Pot because it's going to be a nice 10 or 20 or maybe 30 billion rand windfall for the tax man. So they're very happy. And then the money that's left will be spent. We think about half is going to go into distress payments, which would be debt settlements and payment of overdue mission critical expenses like school and varsity fees and other key serious things which are not necessarily going to be something that moves the needle for the economy. And then half of the money that's left, we think, will be spent on more consumer incorporated style stock spending. People jokingly refer to as the Woolies Pick and Pay, Checkers and Heineken spend. So we're probably going to get a little bit of that, which should be good for some of the SA Inc. stocks, no doubt. I think we might even see a slight movement of the needle on the GDP counter for the country, you know, in a comma something number, and not going to be that massive. But it's at this stage, I guess, all positive and good news is good for the economy. South Africa's on an upward trajectory post the elections. So if anything, the timing of this little bit of good news before December from an economic perspective is maybe a good thing, as long as we don't actually break anything in the pension fund system in the process. So I think the only caveat I want to give is that a lot of the success of this model will be built on how successfully we're able to implement it. And there are some concerns because the timelines were so rushed, but it could take us a few months after 1 September to get the engine to run smoothly.
Okay, great. And I mean, just moving more towards now the sort of impact this could have on more the general landscape. I mean, I spoke quite highly on a big benefit with retirement funds in the current legislation is the protection from creditors. And I mean, most of our client base being more business owners, I think having that creditor protection is something you can't discount. With this new change now, would that savings component be vulnerable to creditors, or does it still offer that creditor protection?
So the savings component sits comfortably within the Pension Funds Act. And so the protections that are offered by the Pension Funds Act on those assets include the protections for the savings component. However, if you have a court injunction against your bank account so that money that lands into your bank account can be whipped away for the payment of an outstanding debt, then obviously once you make the savings account withdrawal, and the pension fund pays the money into that bank account, the minute the money exits the pension fund, it's open season. And the money can then be nicked. But as long as the money remains in the pension fund, in the savings account, there is no way. And that even goes for SARS. So even if you owe SARS money, you cannot actually they cannot go to the retirement fund and say that they want to get your savings component and confiscate that as part of the tax debt settlement. However, if you withdraw from your savings account, SARS will say, hold on, there's a tax liability outstanding here. Actually, pension fund administrator, please just confiscate all of the withdrawal and pay it across to SARS because the pension fund member has an outstanding tax debt. So do watch out for those traps, but as long as you leave the money inside the retirement fund, you should be safe.
That's fantastic to hear. I think that does provide nice comfort to most of the business owners out there. And then also just another interesting point, I mean, more around the portfolio construction. I mean, our sort of philosophy to clients is we like to follow a bit more of a building block model. And I mean, it does really get tailored depending on where the client finds himself in the sort of working stage. But for your more, younger sort of investors or clients with a longer time horizon, we like to maximize the equity exposure within Regulation 28. Do you think now with this new two-part system, do you think you can have a portfolio construction whereby you have the retirement component being almost 100% in equities and then the savings component being 100% in more income instruments?
You can. So the regulations don't block you. However, we think it is risky to do that because just taking the exact example that you mentioned, if you're putting your retirement component into equity, that is 2/3 of your contribution or 66%. So if you're doing the fixed income versus equity split as you've described, it means you're putting 66% into equities and 34 or 33% into fixed income. That is too little in equity. Reg 28 allows you 75% in equity. So actually what you should be doing is putting your retirement component fully in equities, and then on top of that, putting a proportion, at least a half or a third of your savings component also in equities, and then what's left, you can put that in fixed income. So I think people need to watch out that they don't fall in the trap thinking that by putting retirement component into equities and fixed income into the savings component, that you are in fact in that way maximizing your long-term equity exposure. You are not. You are actually underinvesting in equities if you follow that strategy. And so if you like a building block strategy, that's fine, but always remember that you've got to add some of the equity assets to the savings component as well. The only other flag I would hold up is, I mean, our general position is that we think for wealthier clients, I don't wealthier, I don't mean like the super rich. I mean anybody who's on a 40% plus income tax bracket. So that would be people even just earning in the kind of mass affluent range of incomes. We don't believe that the tax risks and the penalties and the costs of the two-pot system is worth the benefit of the liquidity. So we would actually tell people, you know what, if you're a higher earning person, this system was not really designed for you. The system was designed for people who are on the lower income tax brackets and who really have no fallback position when they have a financial emergency. Wealthier clients typically have got an emergency access pot somewhere with a bank account or a money market fund already, and that's what they should be falling back on. They shouldn't be falling back on their retirement savings component pot because the tax penalty is significant. You undermine your 550 tax-free at retirement, and you actually eat into your retirement savings prematurely. So I think it's just not, we don't think it's a good idea for wealthier clients to see the savings pot as something that they should be accessing annually. We think it's something that you should keep there at the back, and maybe once every decade when there's a really extraordinary event, can you dip a little bit into it to help buffer it? But you should have at least one or preferably two other emergency savings layers before you get to your savings pot if you're a high income earner.
No, of course. I mean, just touching on some of the questions the audience has reached out on. I mean, one of the good questions we received here was, if you obviously mentioned quite early on that you're allowed one withdrawal per year, per tax year from the savings component. If clients were to have multiple retirement annuities with many different providers, would they be allowed to more withdrawals? So, for example, if they had, one with one provider and another retirement annuity with another provider, so two RAs with different providers, would they be allowed two withdrawals per financial year?
Yes. So all of the limits that apply in the new two-pot system, one of the nice things are that the SARS has aligned all of those limits to apply at contract level. So even if you have multiple retirement annuities with the same company, each one of those annuity contracts will allow you one withdrawal subject to the 2,000 Rand minimum. And each of those two contracts will actually get a seeding amount with the cap of 30,000. So if you've got two 1 million Rand retirement annuities, you will get 30K seeded per annuity. Whereas if it was one annuity, you will obviously only get 1 times 30K, which is half. So all the limits apply at contract level, not at fund level, and you will therefore get some benefit from owning more than one contract, even if it is with the same fund.
Okay, great. Jaco, please, thank you so much. That was a fantastic webinar. I'm sure the audience really did appreciate it. I am just going to quickly share a poll quickly because there are a couple more questions that we didn't get a chance to go through. And I mean, also just for the last webinar we did, we also offered, a free retirement review for everyone listening, whereby we could look at their sort of retirement aspect. Now, what I'm going to do again is if you would like us just to view your retirement fund and see, how your current setup could be changed. I have just put up a poll here. So if you do say yes, we will reach out and contact you and just take a look at your current retirement fund structure, see how that could change with two parts. But I mean, just Jaco, again, thank you so much for the time today. I'm sure we did all appreciate it. I mean, it was very, very insightful. And I think just the reason why I think we able to give solid advice to our clients because we partner up with excellent providers who hire great people for these topics. So thank you so much, for you and 91 for being here today. We really do appreciate it. And yeah, audience, if there's anything you need, feel free to reach out to us and we'll get back to you. And thank you so much for dialing in.